Well, good afternoon. I would like to thank the presence in this session of the keynote speaker, Leyla Acaroglu, an Australian designer.
Sorry.
Sorry?
Acaroglu.
Acaroglu. Sustainability innovator and educator. She's the founder of two design agencies, Disrupt Design and Eco Innovators. She also founded the UnSchool, a pop-up program that disrupts the mainstream way that knowledge is gained and shared. The program won the Core 77 Design Education Initiative Award. Leyla developed the Disruptive Design method, which is the backbone of her unique approach to design-led social change. In 2016, she was named UNEP Champion of the Earth through the United Nations Environment Programme for her actions, which have had a transformative and positive impact on the environment. Good afternoon, Leyla, and thanks for your contribution to EIMAD. And we are eager to listen about your insights.
Okay, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here with you digitally. I look forward to hopefully in the future coming to visit your facility because it does look fantastic. I am actually here in Portugal because I have a project here, which I'll talk a little bit about. I am Australian and I get excited. So I am sorry for the speed that sometimes words come out of my mouth, especially when I start to talk about the topics that I'm going to discuss with you today because they are my life passion. My background is as a designer. I studied product design. Unfortunately, though, I decided a couple of years into my program that I wasn't really aware of how to solve some of the big complex problems that I was learning about. And so I ended up swapping to sociology and I became a social scientist with the distinct and clear vision of working in social and sustainable design. And then I went back to design at my university and I became a doctorate of industrial design through sustainability. So I kind of did a full circle in the end. So I am a designer and a sociologist. And as Jose mentioned, I work in education, but I also run a design agency. So I kind of do a few different things. As was mentioned as well, I was named Champion of the Earth in 2016, which was a complete surprise to me when they called me to notify me of the nomination by the Deputy Secretary of the United Nations. And obviously I'm very grateful for that award because it's helped me really elevate my work. And I would definitely say it's not that common that designers tend to win such kinds of awards. So it's been really great to help elevate design. As a result of that award, I really reflected on what it meant to be a creative person trying to make change. And so my colleague and I actually created this superpower kit, which we thought of all of the everyday skills that people have that you don't have to get named Champion of the Earth in order to use to make change. And so we came up with this kit. It's freely available and we've had thousands of people download and use it as a way of building agency. Agency is that ability to see the role that you play in the world and to be able to see how you can contribute to changing it. And a lot of our education system doesn't really enable agency. Most traditional education de-agentizes, meaning that the system is designed to create very formulaic and similar ideas so that the outcome is that, you know, as Paola Ferrer, the author of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, states, is the worker bees for the industrial economy. And this to me has been one of the big travesties of our age, is that most of us have gone through a traditional education system, and that has created a reductive mindset, a mindset that is about reducing things down rather than building things up. Now, those of you who are studying creative practices, which I think is everybody here, or is a practitioner in the creative arts, whether it be design or music, or I would even argue science to some degree, have a freedom of thought and creativity that we enable ourselves, and we're also given by our profession. But the reality is that many of the world's complex problems are there because we have created thinking tools and thinking methods that are very similar. And so what I try to do in my work, in my career, is to make tools that help people make change. Okay, so these tools to make change are a variety of different tools over the years, from apps to I do a lot of handbooks, and I run a lot of interactive experiences as well as design toolkits. Many of the toolkits, the physical toolkits, are used all over the world in different locations, from educational initiatives through to design agencies. And what I've learned through the years of doing these and collaborating with different organizations, such as like the AIGA, which is the national body of graphic design in the US, is that designers, just like anybody else, love tools that help them get to that new thinking very quickly. So professionally, I've had a varied career, and I wanted to tell you the story as well as the knowledge that I've learned, because certainly I think that as creatives, we have a lot of opportunity to pick our career path. And that's something that I've been very fortunate to be able to do. So basically the design agency that I run at the moment is called Disrupt Design. It's based in the US, and we design lots of different tools, such as we collaborated with the United Nations to develop a toolkit to help activate everyday lifestyles for sustainability. It's called the Anatomy of Action, and it's based on your hand, because I tried to find a reference point that every single person, well, hopefully nearly everyone in the world, has to remind them that their actions have impacts on the planet and the world around them. We made a lot of content, developed a lot of really cool graphics, and what's beautiful about this project is if you go to Instagram, which was the platform that we wanted to activate this toolkit through, you have people from all over the world in many different languages, editing and adapting the content that we created to talk to their community, to help embrace people with some of the complex problems around them. I've also developed this toolkit for the Finnish education system called the Circular Classroom, which is a 4-part learning system for high school students that give them the tools for future employment based on creativity, sustainability, and the circular economy, and also a module for teachers and educators to help them really rapidly pick up the tools that they need. And as you can see here, we have a very design-led approach, beautiful illustrations and graphics, lots of digital content, very bright and colorful, not your kind of generic sustainability content. We always try to be quite diverse in how we present things. And we design all of these tools as co-creation. So in this picture here, you can see me teaching some of the teenagers, or them teaching me, more to the point. Back in the days when we could be face-to-face, it was really great because some of the elements that ended up in the toolkit were actually ideas from the students about how they want to learn these topics. This toolkit and the Anatomy of Action are both freely available online, circularclassroom.com if you're interested. So the other initiative that I did and very proud of is called the UnSchool of Disruptive Design. It's an experimental knowledge lab that I founded 5.5 years ago when I finished my PhD. And one of the reasons I founded this was because life imitates art, and I was going through the PhD program, and whilst I absolutely loved learning and being involved in academia, I did also find that I was also having to conform myself and my creative ideas to a very strict and rigid framework. And throughout that research, I uncovered a lot of theorists of critical pedagogy and the different experiential educators. And I really felt that there was a massive need for an undoing school, a school that helped us undo the damage that sometimes mainstream education has done to us. And so it's called the UnSchool of Disruptive Design because as a result of my PhD research and the following year, I developed this method called the Disruptive Design method, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the idea of the UnSchool is that we combine these 3 areas of expertise and we give people the agency to make change. So we combine systems thinking, sustainability sciences, and design and creativity. And we've run programs all over the world. We have alumni from, I think it's now 50-something countries. We have thousands of alumni from our online and face-to-face school. And every program, the idea is that we go, we kind of pop up, we do an activation with 20 or 30 people. It's very intensive. And then those people become agents for change in their communities. And they go about doing all sorts of incredible and inspiring things. Every year we partner with the DIF Festival, which is the Disruptive Innovation Festival from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in the UK, and we get to share the amazing stories of people from Mumbai to Sao Paulo to Melbourne to New York who are all embracing different and diverse creative ways of looking at complex problems. And it's extremely interactive. This is us actually playing a giant computer game on a street in Christchurch, New Zealand. And then most recently, I took on this crazy project here in Portugal. I took on this 100-year-old olive farm that had been abandoned because the family had passed away and had no further generations to look after it. And I took it on and spent 3 years applying the design sustainability tools that I teach other people, and learned a lot in the process. Worked with a lot of local contractors and artisans to rebuild the entire thing. You can find visuals online. This is what it looks like when I first took it on, and this is what it looks like now. And we've applied all sorts of different sustainability techniques to the building infrastructure, as well as to the agricultural component. And I've learned a lot of things through this project. I'd never farmed a thing before in my life. That's one thing. I also learned that theory, what you know and what you do, are obviously very different things. I was confronted by many moments where the theory of sustainability was not as important as the practical context that I was working in. And in many times I was faced with this reality that this most sustainable solution actually didn't apply in the context of Portugal in a rural environment. And so that adaptation to the environment that you're in is actually an incredibly powerful tool in design and creativity, because we often come at things with we know the solution, but really we need the environment to teach us what the solution or the best solution is. So basically, one of the other things, my own life as doing these things, like building a farm, and the things that I teach, I've learned more and more every single day of my life that we learn through experience and motivation to experience things. And that is one of the critical tools for helping to solve some of the big complex problems around us. I'm a big fan of Buckminster Fuller, and he always said, you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. You change something by designing a new model that makes the old one obsolete. And that for me is a very inspiring thing that I think of, is that whenever we encounter something we don't like or is unjust or unsustainable, our goal is to then design the alternative that makes that unsustainable or unjust thing disappear. And this kind of is embodied in this idea that I teach and I work on, which is that every problem holds its own solution, that secretly somewhere within it, that if you understand the system, the relationships and the complexity, that you will get to a solution embedded within it. But as I mentioned, many of us have been through a traditional education system, which isn't itself a bad thing. It's that it has a particular way of teaching that we need to understand so that we can develop modes of overcoming this particular issue, which is this idea of reductive thinking. So to break the world down versus to build it up. And the reason this is a problem is because when we approach the world that is incredibly chaotic and incredibly complex with a reductive mindset, we don't necessarily embrace the idea that there is opportunity in problems, that there is a way of finding a new reality or a new way of working in the world. So this mechanical worldview that we have, it's the dominant worldview, created what we call the linear economy. And that linear economy is really one of the huge problems that we face right now from an environmental perspective. So this concept of reductionism is the dominant paradigm or mindset that we have as it stands in the world. So most people are more comfortable in seeing kind of chunks of information or pieces of things rather than the whole complex puzzle. And so that in itself means that we kind of replicate this linear system. We replicate this idea of one-dimensional waste systems, when really what we want to do is move towards a sustainable and regenerative system. So we've created this linear system, which is based on the idea of extracting raw materials from nature, processing them into usable goods, and then disposing them, using them, and then disposing of them in landfill often. Sometimes we recycle, or sometimes those materials escape back into the natural environment in not the best ways, such as ocean plastic waste, which we know globally is a huge issue right now. In fact, only 97%, or is it 94? Somewhere in the 90% range of all plastic ever produced has been recycled. So not recycled. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, I completely messed that up. Let me try that one again. So under 10% of all plastic ever produced has been recycled. So, which is to say that most plastics are still in the world in some way, whether that be still in use in landfill or having had escaped into the natural environment. So what this shows us is that this linear model, this linear approach to the world is creating what economists call negative externalities. Okay, so I was talking about the linear economy and this concept of externalities and how many of the people who are impacted by externalities like air pollution or the plastic waste problem or even climate change are often not the people who created the problem to begin with. And that really creates a number of justice issues and equity issues, but also it kind of explains why globally we haven't really solved some of the big environmental issues of our day. However, let us see what happens in the coming months, because the COVID crisis has really presented a very harsh and stark reality of the need for us to change the way we do things. So back to this concept of the linear versus the circular economy, and essentially nature creates regenerative systems, and apparently extremely disruptive ones emerge by accident and cause all sorts of problems to the dominant human force of the planet. But generally, if you look at nature, if you look at any natural system, its design and its entire objective is to optimize life. And so that means that there's no such thing as death really in nature, that something dying is giving the resources for something new. And that cycle is continually evolving to become more and more effective at achieving its goal of optimizing life. And therefore, regeneration is critical. Whereas humans create systems that devalue natural systems. Our entire economic structure has been based on GDP, gross domestic product, the idea that we can go to nature and we can take a tree, we can extract a resource, in this case, mined materials, without a cost. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a cost to the company who has to hire the men to do the trucks and all of that stuff, but there isn't a cost to the loss of those natural services or systems to us or to the planet as a whole. And that concept has been one of the critical failing points of our modern economy. And that's really where we're seeing this dramatic shift towards business models and a kind of reconfiguring of the way we get goods and services made and how we engage with the world, so that we not only respect the natural systems that sustain life on Earth, like oxygen and the water cycle, but that we understand how nature works so we can work within it. And that's really one of the key things here. In order to do that, we need to fundamentally understand that the world that we live in, the only known life-sustaining planet in the entire universe, is made up of many complex interconnected systems. And those systems rely on each other in a particular dynamic, like a dance, that if it doesn't behave or perform in certain ways, can create many negative outcomes, not just to us, but to other elements of the system. And so having a systems mindset is one of the critical tools that helps us overcome this reductionism. So if reductionism is that the world is this kind of stable, simple place that we can reduce down and see all the little parts that fit together, systems thinking is a holistic, three-dimensional perspective of the complex and dynamic relationships that exist within the world around us. So it's a complete flip from think of like a one dimension to a three-dimensional view. And the way I like to describe this is that a systems thinking mindset enables you to see that if you look through a telescope, you can see the infinite possibility of the universe. But equally, if you look through a microscope, you can see that the tiny little microbes are a mirror image of that infinite possibility of the universe. And this ability to think through perspectives creates an incredible wealth of creativity and knowledge about how the world works and how we all participate within it. So the very kind of classic academic way of explaining this is use the iceberg model, which essentially argues that most people only see the tip of the iceberg when they encounter a phenomena in the world, whatever that may be. And they don't often dive below the surface of the water to see that deep down, the iceberg is held up with a very big mass, and that mass is often built what we call based on the mental models or the frameworks that people perceive the world through. And so one of the massive mental models that we are battling at the moment is the reductive mindset, that idea of mechanical worldview, that the world is like a machine that can operate and tick like a clock, rather than it being a very, very chaotic and dynamic place. So when we look at things from a systems perspective, we see things are interconnected, and fundamentally, we see that everything is interdependent. Things require other things to survive. There is anything on this planet that can live without another service or system around it. And I always like to remind people here, you know, if I'm doing a talk, I often ask people who would like to move to Mars, because it seems to be, was a conversation that was quite popular. I don't know how that's still going to be after the COVID crisis. But because the thing about going to Mars, for example, is that we neglect to have thought about how we can create all of the systems that humans need to survive, whether it be oxygen or even just microbes in soil that creates the microbial activity that then we need to ingest through eating a carrot, for example, so that our digestive systems can give us the nutrients so that we're healthy. You know, everything is interconnected, and without those things, the systems do start to fall apart. Now, there's a fantastic systems thinker, Donella Meadows, who's one of the pioneers of this approach, especially connected to sustainability, who gives a really clear understanding of what a system is. It's a set of related components that work together in any particular environment in order to achieve the system's objective. And what I find fascinating is that when we look at this simple explanation, is you could apply this to absolutely anything. You could apply it to any system around you, whether it be a big natural system or a simple social system. And another key thing about approaching the world from this way is that we start to understand feedbacks and causal relationships. So we can see, back to that idea of every problem holds its own solution, through a three-dimensional mindset, a systems thinking mindset, we can start to see that just a symptom of something is not necessarily the root cause. So we have to seek out information that gives us an understanding of why something is being reinforced, perhaps, or perhaps it is being eradicated through a balancing feedback loop. So just a couple of examples. In nature, the predator and prey situation. So you have like a fox, which is a predator, and you have chickens, which are prey. And in a particular environment, if the fox can get to the chickens, they're going to eat them all, and they're going to get fat and healthy, and those lots of fox babies will be born. But because they ate all the chickens, there's no food. So then the next generation of foxes will die. Only one will survive. Someone will get new chickens. Anyway, the point is that is a balancing feedback loop, meaning elements within the system balance each other out. Whereas a reinforcing feedback loop is where elements in the system create more of the same. The human population rate is one of those systems. We don't have a lot of, well, we didn't until very recently have a lot of things that intervene in our reproductive cycle. And so we're very easily able to dominate the planet. But other types of reinforcing feedback loops are consumption, for example, or a very sad one. Recently, we saw globally the rise of opioid addictions, and the very fact that the more painkillers you take, the more painkillers you need, and that's a reinforcing feedback loop. So being able to see the world from this way gives this extreme wisdom about how the world works. And that applies to every single type of profession, industry, or even our own lives. These tools are very powerful because they help us see through the obvious, back to that iceberg model, and dive under the surface and really seek to understand how the complex systems work. I've created this very simplified model that helps people dissect this down. So whilst we talk about overcoming reductionism, we still do need ways of seeing how systems are layered or how they operate in some sort of cluster. And we have the human-induced systems, the systems we've created. The way I describe them, they're the social systems that would disappear if every single human on the earth disappeared tomorrow. So, for example, the legal system, the government system, the finance system, and the education system. These are all systems that we've created to meet our needs. And they have physical infrastructure that reinforces them, such as buildings and books or courts or paper money or digital transactions, but that those industrial systems, they fit within the product category, they rely on the human system in order to need to exist. And both the industrial and the human systems are fundamentally reliant on the natural world in order to exist. And so by dissecting these down, we have these kinds of layers of systems and how they interact. Another fantastic systems thinker is Peter Senge, who says today's problems are often yesterday's solutions. And by taking this approach to education and to problem solving in general, what we see is we start to design solutions that are part of a constantly evolving solution set. And one thing I think is the most powerful about systems thinking, I've taught thousands and thousands of people how to do simple analog systems maps, is that we start to see relationships versus the obvious part of the system. And most things, back to that feedback loop, exist because of relationships and connections. So all of this is to say that if we can reframe the way we see problems, especially some of the big ones that we face in the world, but also the ones we face in our day-to-day lives, then, and we can apply these thinking tools, then we can start to rapidly evolve the way problems exist. Now, let's look at the current context that we're in. Many of us are currently battling problems relating to our work life and our home life, connectivity. I think many of us are now suffering what I'm calling oxytocin deficiency. Oxytocin is a neurochemical that we all get when we have social interaction with other humans, especially ones we like. You get that from physical contact, like hugging, but it's a very important part of the human social experience. And I think many of us are not getting as much as we used to do. So that creates all sorts of personal problems. But more so, we're kind of dealing with the emergent outcome of a very complex system. So let's just look at this. With COVID, we know that COVID is a zootopic illness. So it's come through an intermediary animal to the human population. Other cases of that are HIV, as well as many of the other everyday flus and viruses that we have learned to adjust to. But one of the fascinating things about this crisis is that there is direct relationships to the environment and environmental issues. So first, I think fascinatingly so, we have air pollution and how areas where air pollution is higher, we've had an increased amount of COVID deaths. There was a Harvard study that came out early on last month that said there is a direct correlation between increased death rates and air pollution. So if you think of New York, the north of Italy, which is really striking. Already over 4 million people every single year die of air pollution related illnesses. So we already have a global health pandemic in air pollution. It's just not as it's not as, I guess, it's not as quick to kind of hit us as this crisis had. Another issue is that there's this unexpected environmental impact. So of course, we're increasing the use of disposable products now because of safety. I mean, I think we can all agree that the single-use face and masks and gloves are going to be a huge issue in the not too distant future. But also we're starting to see how I guess, how much our day-to-day actions are affecting the environment. And because we've ceased a lot of activities, whether it be industrial activities or even just driving in our communities, we're starting to see like how much this was impacting the environment. We're seeing birds return to, I'm sure you've seen all of the studies of like raccoons and birds and all the animals returning to cities. But we're also, I heard an amazing story in India in a town where everyone's in lockdown. But for the first time in 30 years, this community were able to see these snow-capped mountains that surround their village that they've never seen for 30 years because of air pollution. So I feel like we're living in this fascinating time where we're seeing the relationship between cause and effect. Those feedback loops are very, very obvious to us. And when we think of a big global crisis like climate change, we can see how actually all of the arguments that it's really hard to change the economy. Of course, okay, we understand that right now many people are suffering personal and financial losses, and I'm not discounting that, but that there is the opportunity to change the way we do things. And the European Union, New Zealand, and many other countries are calling for the rebuilding of the economy through sustainability. And that's because we're being presented with this reality that our beautiful single planet that we share, it has limits. It has a very biophysical limit, as in it has an atmosphere, and that atmosphere is something that's very important to us for our own survival. But also it has limits in regards to how much it can take, how much waste it can take, and how much pollution. Now, sustainability as a concept is a very simple one. It just means that we are looking to make sure that the decisions that we make as a species don't negatively impact the ability for future generations to meet their own needs. And it's based on the idea of social, economic, and environmental considerations. So not just making an economically motivated one, as we do currently in the linear economy, but we're also looking at the social impacts as well as the environmental. A simple way of putting this is through what's called the ecological footprint, which measures the size of humanity's impact on the planet. We have one planet, we don't have any more. We don't know of any more in the universe that could sustain life. And so what this graph shows us is that since the 1979, 1980, we started to extract and use resources at a faster rate than the Earth could replenish. What this technical term is called Earth overshoot, but and each year that the day in which we do that collectively is marked. And in last year, it was in July, I think the end of July, which means that, so in 1979, it was New Year's Eve, meaning that in that year, we didn't use more resources than the Earth could replenish. But since then, every year, it's becoming further and further down the year. So in the middle of the year now, we've used up our allocated resources. So the Earth is in this deficit. Again, that comes down to that idea of externalities and this goal of moving from that linear and wasteful economy to the circular economy, so that we can figure out how to have a much more regenerative and just society. And designers and creatives and provocateurs of our ideas are so critical in this transformation. So the circular economy really has a pretty simple idea, which is that you have these two types of metabolisms. So you and I have a metabolism in our bodies. We have a digestive system. We put food in, nutrients get extracted, our bodies are powered, waste comes out, okay? The whole planet is one giant metabolism model. And so the circular economy argues that there's the natural metabolism model. So there's natural materials like untreated woods and papers and organic materials that can easily be digested back into nature. Whereas the technical materials, such as like our cell phones or the computers that we're all watching this on, they are much more complicated and require some sort of reprocessing to get those materials back into a benign state or to be recaptured and recycled. And so what we want is designers to design products and services within that circular model so that they understand how the things that they're creating, whether it be a product or service, or system or a concept, can actually go through that cycle. And I mean, I'm doing some fascinating projects at the moment with data and the life cycle of data, which seems, what's the word, like intangible, but you know, every piece of data that exists, it has a physical element to it. You know, like to store something on the cloud requires an actual server to use real energy and to create heat and sit somewhere in the world. So it has a physical impact. Even though we think the internet is not physical. So again, back to Buckminster Fuller, my hero, he says the best way to predict the future is design it. And personally, that's what my life mission is. And I hope that more designers and creatives get excited and exposed to the idea that we all have the agency and the capacity to contribute to a future that works way better than today. And this was the case before COVID, during, and will be after. And so that requires us all to think critically and differently about the problem. Develop a mental toolbox that enables us, each individual, no matter what our skill set, no matter who we are, where we were born, how much money we do or don't have, what gender we are, what race we are, we all have the capacity to contribute to a different future. Because the problems that we face are the product of our actions, and the choice to not act actually reinforces the problems. Anthony Giddens, the wonderful sociologist, talked about this as structuration theory, where he argues that the only reason things don't change is because agents in society reinforce the status quo. So the only way we can change things is when agents change their interaction with the system. And that's where this concept of the disruptive design method comes in. So I created this method to enable that ability to think between the infinite possibility of the universe and the microscopic reality of, you know, the biological world we live in, and to create this three-dimensional perspective. In my years of teaching and working in this space, I realized a lot of people use the reductive mindset to solve problems, but they don't even realize that they're doing that. So I wanted to create a method that enabled people to really learn to love the problem, the relationships that exist within it, before they get to the creative problem-solving part. So just to run through that, it has a construction metaphor: mining, landscaping, and building. Mining is to understand the problem. In this stage, we suspend the need to solve. Very hard for many creative people. We often want to solve the problem immediately, but unless we truly understand that below the iceberg part, we don't have necessarily the information that's going to mean that the outcome we create is the best fit for the problem, and that will really truly change it. So the mining phase, we suspend the need to solve. We go on a research expedition to understand what's holding up the system, what's reinforcing it, and we, in that stage, collect all these little pieces of the puzzle. And then in the landscaping phase, we come up and we put those pieces together to get a bird's eye view. We get that different perspective, looking down like we're in an aeroplane onto the landscape of our problem. And from that, we start to identify the areas of intervention, the places in which we could create a shift within the status quo. And that's when we start to build solutions. That's when we bring our ideation and creativity mind. And this all gets cycled through. So it's not static, it's an iterative process like all creativity. But the idea is that over time, you increase the ability for you to create an intervention that is most likely going to shift the status quo of the problem, which is the concept of disruption. It's not to reinforce something, it's to use the resources available to you to create something that makes the old obsolete, and really kind of enable us to dive deep under the iceberg, as it were, to be able to see, to shift those mental models so that the outcomes that we come up with are far greater than the problems we have already. And so what that means is that we need many cultural shifts, some of which are underway right now, surprisingly. But also I think before the COVID crisis, we were already seeing a realization that the planet that we all share is at it's having its limits pushed, with many externalities that were causing negative impacts on many of us, and that it needs to be our responsibility to overcome those issues. So design is a tool to help solve these complex problems. I think that if we can each shift our perspective of the role that we play as individuals and the role that we play as creatives in the world, and I think that is a very broad term, because I actually truly believe that every human is a citizen designer of the future. Every action we take, what we buy, what we say, what we share on social media, what we do for our work, these are all actions that will construct the type of world we live in. And that to me is a really beautiful and amazing thing, that we each have the possibility to create a future that works better than today, one that is made up of intentional actions to design and create and craft a future that's beautiful, sustainable, and regenerative. So on that note, I will thank you for listening and open the floor to questions.
We are pleased to listen for your contribution, Leyla Acaroglu. It was very interesting to see the global perspective that you built on the theoretical, conceptual, and technical solutions that grab the view of each designers and the community that is around us. For starter, I would like to ask you a question. My question relates to the following concept. The issue of due to the recent events with the COVID-19, what are the most direct contributions of disruptive design on the construction of a perspective of a human ecosystem not structured solely by a neo-capitalist logic? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you understood, because
yes, of course. I think neo-capitalism, I have a lot to say about this, so I'll try and make a succinct response. I think that the COVID crisis is a symptom of many convergent social and environmental problems, right? So the disrespect of nature, the fact that many scientists are talking about the encroaching of urban environments into natural environments. Those edge zones are often where we're seeing the jump of these zootopic diseases. We saw it with Zika as well. Remember the virus that bit with mosquitoes? So that is showing us that the more we disrespect the natural environment, the more the natural environment affects us in these not desirable ways. And that is directly linked to our exploitation of natural systems and services, because we live in a system that teaches us that we are dominators of nature, that we are not part of nature. And because we are disconnected from the natural systems, we are almost in an abusive kind of relationship where we knowingly create these horrible outcomes, but with not any conscious empathy or ethical considerations to those outcomes. So that is very much a product of, as you say, neo-capitalism. But I think capitalism is not the problem. Capitalism is not great, nor is any kind of global geopolitical, social, structural forces, because it's easy to blame that rather than to look at the root cause of the problem, which is that we have constructed a relationship built on deficits. So even if you create a capitalist alternative or, a communist alternative, it's still based on the dominance and deficits, extraction and exploitation. It's not based on learning from the systems that created us so that we can build systems that give back more than we take, which is the concept of regeneration. And so for me, whilst there are many of the those social problems, and capitalism is a social problem, we constructed it, therefore it's a social construct. I think that, you know, the really significant issue here is that from the moment we go to school, we are taught that to break the world down into manageable chunks, we chop it up with our knife and fork in our minds and we digest it, rather than being immersed in it in complete wonderment of the magic that it is to be the only known living species in the entire universe. Yet we disrespect that. We don't have that aura of wonderment, and generations before us did. So, you know, cause and effect here shows us that we need to overcome that problem through structural forces before we can really start to design a system, an economic system or model that helps to really benefit us and the planet that we all need.
And let's see if we have any questions from our public.
Are they going to, Katja, you just unmuted yourself.
Oh, very attentive.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all. Please. Okay.
I really loved your presentation. Thank you very much. Very passionate. It's really great when you see people speaking about something, you can really feel it is in their body and in their mind and everywhere. So thank you for that. As we are in a design conference and also a lot of students are watching us, my question is, you spoke about a mental toolbox. So we speak a lot now, I mean, you are also comfortable with design thinking and these new concepts. I will speak about that tomorrow. So I was curious when you mentioned a mental toolbox, not a design toolbox. So perhaps that would be interesting.
Well, I think that that's really the systems mindset, right? So rather than seeing things in isolation, you see them as connections. So I'm a big fan of cognitive science and behavioral science, and with my sociology side of things, I've done quite a bit of work in that space. And one of the tools that cognitive scientists use to help people overcome biases are, the kind of shared brain viewpoints that subconscious decisions. Let me just give you an example. There's one called the confirmation bias, which is where we seek out information that reinforces what we already believe. So every time you're Googling, we all do it. You scroll, you don't click on the ones that don't really interest you, so you're selecting the information that you receive. Then we have the bystander effect, that if you're standing in a group and one something happens and nobody else takes action, you're less likely to take action because the social cues of those around you. Anyway, there's hundreds and hundreds of these biases that everybody has, they're shared social conditions, and some have really not great outcomes. So we have one called loss aversion. It's one of my favorites. It's that if we have invested time or money in something, then we have this real dilemma if we need to give up or quit or walk away or something with the energy or time we've invested. So often we end up staying in relationships or jobs or on projects that don't make any sense, but because we're worried about losing what we've already invested. And so that really creates all sorts of different problems for us as a society, as educators, as students, and as future professionals, because unless we're aware of those biases, we can often recreate problems. So the interesting thing that cognitive scientists argue you can use as a mental tool to overcome biases, to your point about what would be in that toolbox, is this idea of cognitive reversal, which is the technical term, but I like to call it flipping the script. Literally meaning when you encounter one type of thought process, like a negative thought process about something, if you flip the script, meaning you have to completely flip to the opposite perspective of that problem or that idea and see what that mindset enables you to do. So a simple example is you're in a store and I don't know, no one's in stores these days anyway. Well, you encounter something you don't like, okay? You read something you don't like and it makes you angry. This happens all the time, right? Like on social media. And your immediate reaction is like, that person is so wrong. I don't like them or da-da-da. So the cognitive trick there would be like, okay, I respect that I feel that way, but what happens if I try and see it from their perspective? I flip my perspective and see it from theirs. Okay, well, maybe they're feeling scared and angry about this. Okay, well, actually, I could see how they could feel that way. And suddenly you open up this huge space, not to say that you have to agree with that person, but you, instead of locking yourself into the one-dimensional mindset that you have because it's just the default, you're forcing yourself to create this huge space in your mind to think differently about the problem. I have lots of tools. I've created lots of handbooks that talk about these things. And one of them I talk about is called lensing, which was the best term I could come up with. But I literally describe it as if you go to the theater and you're sitting in the seats watching a play, they have light gels, you know, like green or yellow or red, and they put them over a white light to create different ambience in the theater, right? So the green one makes you feel like you're in nature and the yellow one like in the sunshine. And so we need to all have that ability to put different perspectives in front of us so that we don't get locked into our own thinking about something, because there's no way we're going to solve a problem with the same mindset that led to it. In fact, Einstein said one of the big problems we face is that we use the same thinking that led to the problems to try and solve it. So for me, they're all the kinds of tools that we use in our mental toolbox to create change and to create things in general. You know, design thinking as a tool set is like any tool, like a hammer. You can kill somebody or build a house. They're two very different outcomes with the same tool. And just because something, like the same with the disruptive design method, you know, I'm very aware that you could also use it to create something very unethical and very unsupportive of society, because you've got the agency to figure out the inner workings of something. But, you know, at the end of the day, the most important thing for us to all do as well is to have our own moral code of conduct as individuals and as agents in the world, and set a compass to what we want the world to be and to help make that happen. And hopefully we have a shared vision that the things we do are better than the things of the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Actually, that reminded me when I normally told students, don't fall in love too early with your ideas, because then you are not able to put these different filters, different colors or different perspectives or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the same in the negative way. Don't be what you mentioned, don't be too angry too early, but try to see other perspectives. So don't fall in love too quickly, but also don't hate too quickly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's very easy to be biased towards or against ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it's easy to be like, oh, that's the best idea ever. Or it's be negative speak. You know, you have that equally as problematic. So yeah, look, at the end of the day, we all want to have as many creative ideas as possible and find ways of testing them to make sure that they do fit the problem that we're trying to solve in the best way possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Anyone else? Questions? Comments?
More questions?
Thanks for all the messages. You're all very quiet. You're reinforcing your Portuguese audience stigma. Anyone else? Come on, Laura, what about you? You look like you have a question. Picking on people.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a student from University of Interior, and I'm wondering if you can give us a little tip for our work. We are making a sustainable piece.
Sorry, say again?
A sustainable piece of clothing.
Okay, cool.
And we can't buy anything. We only can use the resources in our house.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
I want to.
So the question I was asking is about the function. So what kind of functional requirements have you been given for the garment?
We can do anything. I'm doing a dress out of a blanket.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to do basically all the process, since the resourcing of materials, the researching of concepts, circular economy. We need to do like a company will do it, but we need to do everything. So
okay, that's cool, because you're basically trying to build a business case around the concepts as well as product.
But just the product.
Well, some of the kind of sustainable design strategies that fit the fashion and apparel industry are obviously your material choice. So natural and breathable materials and all of that kind of jazz, which you're probably doing already. But also it's patterning, the pattern that you use to create the garment. So zero waste patterning is where you create the seam lines so that you cut once and you don't end up with refuse offcuts. So that's the really key challenge. The creative challenge is, if you have a square, how do you create the different sizes of products, or how can you create a multi-use product that reduces the amount of materials and material waste still from what you're using? So they're two key things. And then also what we call multi-functionality. How do you make it so that it's got multiple functions? So could it still be a blanket as well as a dress, a fashionable one, and reusability. So if it's, well, you're already doing that because you're going from blanket to dress. Could it then go to something else? Could you actually have printed on the inside a new pattern that somebody could use to create another product? So these are all some of the kind of strategies that make the product unique and interesting, and to help make it have more value to the customer who's buying it.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. Good luck with it. It sounds great.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Someone in the comments had thought something.
Yeah, was it there? I don't know. I can't see it. Hang on. Okay. Lots of okay. Portuguese project you mentioned. So the co-project, it's based in Serra Tomar in a small town there. And so for the last 3 years, I restored and regenerated the project to run workshops and programs there. We ran UnSchool programs, and then the facility is also available for other people to use for projects. But it really was a mixed-use experiment into different types of organic agriculture and regeneration as a concept. So if you go to coproject.co, it will have information. We actually have just decided that we're not going to run any programs this year because of the COVID crisis, because people tend to come from other locations from around the world. And so we decided to just hold off on programs until next year. But so hopefully in the summer of next year, we'll be able to welcome people back to the farm. But with all of this chaos at the moment, it's been a hard but important decision to make. But yeah, it's a beautiful project. I'm very proud of it. We have animals and all sorts of different things growing, and just really looking at that natural system design and to learn from nature, as I said, as a tool for helping to create other solutions. And so now I get commissions from companies to come and advise them on how to design more sustainable products. And I think of something I've learned on the farm. And that's something that's been really incredible for me, is just really learning from the natural systems around us. So that's what the goal of that project has been. And then I found a Portuguese puppy on the side of the road, and so he's made me very Portuguese stuck. So he's very annoyed right now. He's behind the computer screen looking at me because I haven't taken him for a walk yet. Any other questions about Portuguese puppies, maybe? Joking, yes?
Leyla, I have another question to you. It's about project management. From your contributions and strategies and so on, the main challenge that I see is how to cope those concepts that you presented with the short time that we have as designers to do a project.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and often what I've learned is the biggest problem is the brief. The parameters that you get given up front often kind of channel you down a pathway of unsustainability, and the time restrictions that is often put. Also, most clients have absolutely no idea about creative process, so they think that you have some magical box that you just pull things out of, and they don't realize that you actually need time and resources and mental space to solve a problem. So I battle with that all the time with my clients. So I think that time is a massive parameter, but like any parameter, they can be used as a pretty effective framework for creativity. So that's why I think sprints, this idea of, design sprints have become quite popular, because you're kind of forcing yourself to, like an athlete who learns how to run with endurance or with speed, you're learning how to craft your skills to be able to do your job in a more efficient or effective way. So that's one kind of hack or solution. But the other thing is I think being more realistic with clients. Like, I always advise, and do it myself, to have a longer period of trying to get the project up so that you can be really clear up front about the duration timeline. Like, I mean, the more granulated you can be with your clients or customers or whoever you're working with, to express exactly that you really will need 3 weeks. And these are the reasons why you need 3 weeks, because you're going to do these 400 things in 3 weeks to figure out the solution. And once you've built that once, what I've learned is that it can be reconfigured for many different scenarios. So, I've learned to do that in my own work, because I always get so annoyed with clients who don't understand that, I can't just really, I just need another week to figure it out. And so I feel like that transparency is really important. Like, I think for design thinking's helped kind of open the world of creativity up to people. But at the same time, I think the majority of people are still very confused about what design is and how it works, and the steps or processes that have to happen in order for you to come up with a truly effective, commercially viable, like something that actually can be made as well. So yeah, I think being transparent and clear, if you can't use the parameter of time as a creative tool, then it also helps. So yeah, I think Gantt charts are great, and really clear spreadsheets or even just tables that go out with the proposal, really clear timelines. I think, it's boring, but it's necessary. That's what I've learned. And I think the earlier on in your career, Jose, probably not you, but some of the other people who are starting out, I cannot express enough how important planning is. So boring, but so important. And, I always encourage people when they're starting a project to answer the simple who, what, when, where, why, how in single paragraphs, just a 2-page document, really quickly. And it helps frame what it is that you're doing. It also helps you, the act of writing or of thinking through those simple questions, help you really kind of get that distillation and clarity on what you're trying to achieve. And after a while, you don't necessarily have to write it down. Your brain just kind of does it, ticks it off. Like, who's this for? Well, how am I doing it? Why is it important? What's the timeline? So yeah, planning, as boring as it is, it's really important, and it saves a lot of problems later down the track, for sure.
Do you think that we can justify all that study to a client as a diagnostic phase?
Well, I think it really depends on what product category and the type of client. I have trouble still sometimes convincing companies to pay for the time and resources it takes to really understand the problem before we solve it. I agree, it is a sticking point. I think though, like anything, I personally, as a practitioner in my field, wanting to be the best I can be, spend a lot of my own personal time doing that research, that mining phase, that exploration. And so it means that when someone does hire me, they hire all that tacit knowledge. And so I can actually now, I guess back to that point of kind of becoming more refined or capable of doing that. So very quickly I can, I've expedited the process. However, if I'm dealing with a very complicated new topic, like I mentioned, I'm working on this data stuff, it's very new for me and I'm not an expert in that field. So I do need to really clearly spend more time. And I do take on that myself personally in some of my own free time because I'm interested as well. So it is a challenge, and not everybody has that luxury because of other commitments and things. So I mean, look, it is like any conundrum, one that, you know, you have to kind of navigate it on a case-by-case basis. But I would always try to get, you know, the clients to understand this and to be excited about the research phase. And one trick to get them involved is to co-create. So what I always do is I have a kind of a visioning or exploration workshop up front if I can, even if it's some interviews or team. Get them involved as much as possible, because the more they're involved, the more they understand what's going into this. And you don't have to take their ideas, but you do certainly can hear their thoughts and opinions. And it often means that they come to their own realization that what they originally wanted isn't actually what they need. So co-creating or co-design as a technique, as an approach, is a very powerful tool. And I use that in 99% of, well, 95, I'd say, % of my work and projects, however I can.
Okay, interesting.
Great. Anyone else have any other questions? What about any of the students? Any projects you're working on that you need some advice on?
Students.
You're all using your inside voices.
More questions?
If you ask me a question, I will show you my puppy. Wow, that didn't even work. None of you. I know there's one of you sitting there going, should I?
You're very shy.
I know.
Actually, I want to see your puppy.
See, now Laura, you have to convince somebody else to ask a question because you've already asked one. See, look how confident she is now. She asked a question. What about Christina or Andrea or Anna or Sarah or Katerina or Juliana?
I'm going to take your...
challenge.
Your challenge, yes. I like very much your presentation because it helps us to think out of the box or think differently, or at least try to start to think differently, which by the way, it's a good principle. I would like to ask you if you can show us more the project that you are dealing with in Portugal. So do you have more information? Which are the objectives that you have beyond this wonderful place that is Portugal, and the wonderful atmospheric climatic conditions, and a good way to be inside the house in these COVID times? So can you tell us more about your Portuguese project, please?
Sure. Well, outside of the physical farm, the project was to bring circular economy principles here to Portugal and to work with different sectors of society and government. And we have a very small team here, and we're doing that in different ways. I mean, my work, wherever I go, the goal is to kind of try and activate that change. And there are some really interesting manufacturers and producers here in Portugal. So I've worked with members of the shoe industry, the packaging industry, tourism, and we've looked at different ways that they can embrace supply chain management and sustainability. And for me, that's really exciting because there's a lot of scope and possibility here in Portugal. So that's been one of the goals. And then the other goal has just been to look at the concept of rural regeneration, not just in Portugal, but globally. There's 1 billion hectares of land that has been abandoned. And that is a very concerning issue when we have this consolidation of the food supply systems, and we have a huge sustainability issue. In fact, food is one of the biggest impacts that each of us has on the planet every day. We have to eat 3 times, and we pull on all of these invisible systems. So however we can get closer to our food sources, and you know, until recently Portugal was a very strong food producer for its own population, and I think that's changing a lot generationally. Such as Portugal, it's a global issue, and it just so happened to be that this was the location that I was able to do this project. And so it was kind of trying to inspire other people. I said I always wanted the co-project to be copyable, so other people would find in their community, and certainly if you have the ability to restore land in any way, to bring it back to a natural state or to a productive state, then it's a very beautiful, simple offering back to the planet. So that was also kind of a thing that I've learned. And however we can get more people doing that, if it's in their backyard or in a shared urban garden, or if it's in the quinta that they inherit from their grandparents, you know, we have a lot to learn and a lot of opportunity to kind of regenerate these parcels of land around the world that are being abandoned, and in that process they're getting more and more destroyed.
So do you really believe that these times that we are living, it's a disruptive moment to rethink the way we live?
Of course. I mean,
I'm telling you this because my PhD, it was more or less 20 years ago, it was about telework. I'm an architect. And I can tell you, 20 years before this time, everybody says that I was completely crazy and no one would take telework. And more than that, it was not a subject to treat in a PhD of architecture. So I made the PhD outside Portugal. I made it in UK. It was very important to me. And at the end of the PhD, it was in the 2000 year, I defended that we could go further the city center in order to have a more sustainable ways of living, and to cope with all the challenge that sustainability was raising. And the only way to do it was to be supported by technology, because to be outside the big city, you really need to have a job, to have something to support your existence in terms of economics situation. So I really do believe that this time of pandemic, it's a very good opportunity to rethink the way we are designing our cities
and our lives. You're talking about lifestyle design, basically.
Yeah.
And I think more and more the freedoms that technology is enabled, but also just in the whole way people work is changing. People are selecting less financial security for more personal freedom with the rise of the gig economy. Also, purpose in the workplace is becoming a major driving force in decisions around why people would work for certain companies. And so I agree. I mean, I think it's great that you must be feeling quite vindicated right now, like going, I told you so, 20 years.
Yeah,
I mean,
you can't believe it. But
I feel that way about sustainability. You know, when I started my career, it was like 18 years ago, and, you know, I had to bash down doors to get people to listen to me. And I was not even at the beginning. This was happening for 20 years before me. So now that we see that most major corporations in the world have a conversation about this, and we are seeing that most individuals at least have some concept of environmental issues, we are really seeing that kind of mindset shift. And the COVID crisis, I think, has really demonstrated that we can very quickly change things. And all of the work that gets done in the past and in the future helps make that happen. So Christina, work like yours 20 years ago somehow helps to contribute to that reconfiguring. It takes time sometimes, like change can often take time. But
well, you make my day. But I can tell you, I want to tell you something. I'm not so quite sure. I'm not so quite sure that we are moving to something else. I do believe that we'll stay in the same place.
Okay, I promise. Here you go.
Oh, well, I could show you mine. It's a golden retriever. It's a little bit bigger than yours. but it's a very cute boy. So you really need to bring it every single conference, because it gives you a more human
yes, he's very
age.
spoiled as well. So
Yeah,
he's
it's a photogenic being.
stretching.
Yeah, and he likes to be in the conference, you know.
He does. He likes, he right now, if you could actually see the way he's sitting, oh gosh, look, he's like actually on the desk.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that note, I think he's begging me to take him for a walk.
Yeah, so it was a
Jose,
pleasure.
Cover anything else?
Okay,
Jose,
bye.
do you want to cover anything else?
Anybody else has any question?
If it's
The puppy
possible.
can answer the next one. Bruno.
Hi, I'm from Laura's class, and I have a question about the capitalism that you said, the system we live in, and if it's possible that, as for example, fashion designers, or if you have a brand, if it's possible for you to trick the system, I mean, make fashion actually accessible and democratic for everybody, because when you make something slow fashion or with upcycling on it, it's like you reuse and things like that, but it's still expensive and not everybody can afford it. So is it possible to make it democratic for, I mean, actually democratic, because fast fashion says that they do what they do to make fashion democratic, and I think that's a lie. I mean,
Yeah, IKEA also says that about their furniture. So yeah, I think the issue here, okay, puppy down. I think the issue is that there's always these tensions, right? So tensions between the business model, the business proposition, the feasibility of that, and the desirability of your product in the market, and the willingness to pay. So there is this tension between like the kind of business end of things, the creative end of things, and the sustainability end. But I think there's a way to harmonize those things, right? That's the goal of figuring that out. It's not to be obsessed with one or the other. It's to find that sweet spot in the middle where you can create really cool, contemporary, sustainable products that are accessible, but that also mean that you as the creative and the creator of that have a business that you can sustain and sustain your livelihood. And again, like that's the challenge. That's the creative challenge, finding that sweet spot. And it takes some time and iteration. I mean, I've had to reconfigure my own business model several times to try and keep it equitable. Like we have an equity model. We give away 20% of our content for free, hands down. So every time we do a program, we always reserve places for people who can't afford it. And just to always make sure that that's there. And when I give people advice who are starting new businesses, I'm like, well, just build in an equity pay it forward model. Like just find a way to make sure that when you are making an income, that some of that income is being redistributed to other people. So maybe you make a product line where some ideas are free, or they're, people can DIY it, or, and some other products people pay for. So I just, there isn't a simple answer to this. It's really about the creative way that you approach the problem, and you find out how you can, harmonize or kind of create that sweet combination of those elements that you need to bring into it to make it successful. Because if it's not economically viable, the reality is things still need to exist within the system. We live in this system. And we need to value things. So we also need to value the things we create and the things that come from nature. So if anything, some sort of economic value needs to truly represent the cost of production, which is what it doesn't. But then at the same time, we have the equity issue of like, if you don't have hard cash, how do you afford the things? So I agree that this creates a big challenge. But then what if, you create a product that you sell, but you also create the plans to be able to create that product. But, these things, they are sticky sometimes, and they do have a lot of, that's again where the co-design, co-creation comes in. Like you can come up with a concept and go and talk to people, engage with them, get them to see how it would work for them, different types of people in different situations. So, when you can do that again, because right now you can't. The only people we can hug are puppies. Yes. Okay. So, Jose.
I have one last question to you.
Sure.
Is how do you engage people to work in an off system? A system without a cash, without recompensation. How do you engage, for example, people in a local village that all their lives they were poor people and they are eager for money? How do you engage them working in an off system?
Okay, well, first of all, there's a rule, economic rule called the reciprocity rule, which is where usually when someone gives you something, you are inclined or feel motivated to return that, right? So that's basically how exchange, bartering, that tends to work. If I speak specifically to the Portuguese context, because I do think what's fascinating here is that for hundreds and hundreds of years, this was a bartering economy. Until very recently, where the government institutionalized via monetary exchange and really makes it quite enforced, right? So, you know, this rule about if you're driving with stuff in your car without a receipt for it, you can get in trouble, blew my mind. So, you know, I buy a lot of secondhand goods and from other people using platforms that enable me to do that. And it's surprisingly like not really encouraged here. I mean, it also is because GDP, the measurement tool that we use globally to see our success, doesn't include the sale of secondhand goods. So there's a lot of disincentives for that kind of behavior in the modern economy. And I think that really does need to change. And so from a regional level, from a kind of Portuguese standpoint, my our kind of perspective is that there's also been like a legitimizing through the taxation system and the NIF system, a legitimizing of monetary transfer versus bartering and exchange. And that I think has made the idea of bartering and exchange seem old and antiquated. And so that's more like a mindset as well as a real structural force, because unfortunately from what I understand here is like those kinds of actions are actually frowned upon by the state and it's seen as illegal. But I might be wrong, but that's what I understood was the case with exchanges.
Okay.
So, you know, that's a nice one to write to your politicians about.
Good idea, good idea. Any more questions?
I don't have anything else to barter with you. You've already seen the puppy. So now any questions that come are just out of your own interest. Well, perhaps if there aren't any more questions, then I can just summarize like the things I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. So the anatomy of action and the circular classroom are all fantastic free resources online. And also on the UnSchools online, we have a lot of free resources. So Laura, your design project, we have a toolkit called the Post-Disposability Design Toolkit. That would actually talks about fashion and some of the strategies around that. So if you jump on online.unschools.co, there's a tab that says free resources. There's lots of things, a superpower kit, really great for students. If you wanted to review those, especially if you have projects around sustainability and bringing these things into your design practice. Yeah, and always feel free to reach out to our team. I can't always answer our emails, but our team are always excited to help people. So yeah. And good luck with your assignments and for the rest of the conference.
Okay, so Leyla, many thanks for your contribution. It was central in our event. We hope to contact you in the near future.
Hopefully, when things open up, I can come with Puppy, and we can come and meet the facility.
Eventually,
yeah.
Here to Castelo.
It's not so far from my farm, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not far. It's not far. Your farm is in Torres Vedras, is it?
It's near Tomar, near the Castelo de Bon, the dam.
Oh, so it's somehow some 100 kilometers, 150.
There you go.
I think so. So we are eager to collaborate with you in the near future. Thank you.
My pleasure. It was really great to be involved, and I'm glad that we were able to make this happen still. It shows how adaptive we all are to this chaotic time, but also still great to really connect, and hopefully I've given you some nice ideas to think about, and that the rest of your semester goes well as well.
Okay, so we will keep in touch, and till the next time.
Next time, we say. Okay, thank you all so much. It was really great to digitally meet you. Okay, ciao.
Ciao.